Sorry.
Typical disgusting display.
Oh, tonight we got 'em. Goldy, the Sulk, and JC.
The typical disgusting display. And it starts right now.
Oh, welcome back to another episode of A Typical Disgusting Display podcast. What is it?
Four
writers by writers who hate writing.
Boom.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it is.
Wow, man.
I've only said it
What are you
78.
vaping today?
Oh, it's the good stuff today. All right, folks. Boy, are we excited today. If you've been a fan of comedy in this century, our guest today needs no introduction. He rose to fame as a writer-performer on Saturday Night Live and is currently host of the coolest time slot in late-night history. Please welcome the alarmingly affable Seth Myers. Seth,
Yay.
thank you for being here today.
Welcome.
Thank you for drawing attention to my affability.
Yes, no one ever does that.
Often overlooked.
Yeah, right. Is that in every article written about you?
I feel like maybe my affability has been discovered by others.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I'm
It's
not
true.
first to that story.
I told him not to do that.
He tells me not to do
secretly
everything.
negative.
In fairness.
Dig in.
Well, you have a nice smile, Seth.
Oh,
you have
thank
a
you
nice
very
smile.
much. Thank
America
you.
loves that. Now, I have a bone to pick with you right out of the gate.
Oh, great.
Right
Wow.
out
Let's
of the
get
gate.
picking.
Okay, so you don't know me that well. We have a procured Twitter relationship.
Yeah.
Which, thank you for your support over the years, by the way. My closest movie equivalent, and Goldy will back me up on this, is Salieri from Amadeus.
Interesting.
So, like most Salieris in the world, when I saw you start to rise up on Saturday Night Live, was I happy for you? Was I sitting there smiling? I thought, who the fuck is this guy? But then I hear that all too important piece of information for New Englanders. He's from New Hampshire. And then it was just all love. You're rooting for the hometown kid. But in researching this very podcast, I discovered you were born in the Midwest and lived there until the age of 10. So I want to know, do you consider yourself a Midwesterner or a New Hampshirean?
I consider myself a New Hampshireite 100%.
Yes.
And it's very kind of you to say that because I have often made the observation. Where are you from exactly?
I'm from Goldy and I are both from suburban Boston. I'm from a town
Lexington,
called
Mass. Shot heard around the
Weston.
world.
So I feel as though where you people are from, you do not consider New Hampshire family. I have always found that the closer you are to Boston, the more you feel like the people farther away from Boston don't belong. So I am enjoying that you are willing to throw your arms and embrace my New Hampshire roots. But, my parents are still there. My mom's from Marblehead. And so it felt very natural to fall into New England and feel like that was my home. And it still does.
That's a
I've
good
had
answer.
fireworks thrown at me twice, and both times were in New Hampshire.
Seems about right.
Yeah, there are a lot of them.
In return, I hope you got some tax-free liquor for your problems.
Yes. Oh,
Those
God.
places are amazing.
Yeah, what a feature. Right over
Such
the
a
border.
coincidence, that they all ended up right over the border.
People so desperate to get there, they don't want to drive an extra half mile. Now, so growing up in New Hampshire, who made you laugh when you were a kid? Like who or what made you laugh?
I mean, my dad made me laugh the most. My dad's a very funny man, and even though, he's in finance, he was always someone who held the attention of other people. And, to this day, I think of him as certainly the person who planted the roots that if you're funny, you tend to hold people's attention. And also my mom's a very beautiful woman. And I think my brother and I both realized if you can make someone laugh, you can do way above your station. And then the other thing that was really cool about my parents is they kind of came up of that generation where comedy got cool right when they were in their early 20s with things like Monty Python and when SNL started. And they shared that with us at a time that I think was probably a little age inappropriate.
Right.
But so not only did my dad make us laugh, but we also liked laughing at the same things that made our parents laugh. And so I never liked, outside of obviously Looney Tunes, which I feel like is also like more adult than we give it credit for. I never liked anything that was aimed at kids.
Yeah.
In the way that I feel like my peer group was. So that kind of family sitcom was always a drag. But we would, my brother and I would watch SNL, we would tape it, and then the next morning we would show my parents the 3 things we thought they'd like.
Was that the agreement? Just 3 things. We can't
It was
sit here and watch.
You know what it really was? It's funny that even years before I was on SNL, I was worried that my parents would say SNL stunk. Like in the late 80s, I didn't want my parents to be like, it's not as good as it used to be. I think I would have been personally.
Are they supportive? Do they stay up and watch it, or do they do the New England thing of like it? It's very late. We try to catch it. We hear good things.
That's a very good question. I feel like they probably didn't watch it live in the years I was on, but I don't know. No, I think they were already too old. I wouldn't have expected them to. I'm very happy
Do they
to
watch
say
your current show?
they watch every episode of Late Night. They do watch
amazing.
every episode of Late Night the following day before they watch Jeopardy. That is their
that's
their
actually
process.
awesome. That's awesome. It's so funny that you don't really know if they watch Saturday Night Live or not, and nothing says you're more New England than that. It's like, we're just never going to talk about it.
Your mom and Ted, Alec.
What's that?
You wrote the movie Ted.
Oh yeah. And
She's never seen
hasn't
it.
No, she
It
doesn't.
was a
but
giant comedy hit.
right. Well,
Was
but
she-
she doesn't like R-rated.
There
She
you go.
doesn't like R-rated.
There you go.
But she doesn't like Family Guy either. She doesn't listen to this podcast, but she did see a little snippet last week when I was talking about having to take a shit, and she was like, "I saw the snippet. Very nice, very nice. I couldn't get through it." So we all know that growing up in New England. Now I'm curious. Now, you said late '80s, but what season around of SNL were you doing this taping?
I bet it's 90. Yeah, it's probably 90, 91. Let me see. I said, no. Yeah, so 89. I feel like my era is the end of that Carvey, Hartman, Lovitz, Dennis era, and also the beginning. That was really exciting, and you realize why that show endures for so long is when the Farley, Spade, Sandler, Rock showed up, and you realize, this is my crew.
Right.
And I really, and now of course the older you get, you think of them all, it all sort of flattens out in a good way. Anyone who was ever good on the show belongs to you.
Yeah.
But at the time, that was so thrilling. And also because my parents liked them a little bit less, right?
Yes.
It was having exactly the desired effect. Whereas I think my dad thought somebody like Phil Hartman was very precise and workmanlike. He showed up with his lunch pail. He got the job done. And then these kids, it's like they have no respect for it. They're breaking tables.
I remember distinctly my dad, almost like nails on a chalkboard when he first heard Adam Sandler. It was just like, he was not in for that. And I'm like, this is who we find funny.
Although I will, Sandler is from basically my hometown.
Yes.
And so is Sarah Silverman. So that is the crazy thing about New Hampshire and SNL. I would think if you put the push pins on the map of everybody over the years, there's this weird hot spot in southern New Hampshire. But I've talked to my mom over the years. We can't, because she was a school teacher, and she can't. I have a theory that not every New Hampshire kid talked like Adam Sandler until Adam Sandler. That Adam Sandler, you think everybody in New Hampshire talks like him, but I think he taught everybody how to talk.
That's such a great theory. And, that actually lines up with pilots. You know how they all kind of talk the same way? Like we're folks.
Yeah.
That is apparently all because of Chuck Yeager used to talk like that. And so they copied him, and it's still, to this day, they're still talking that way. But I completely agree with Adam Sandler, like shaping this youth of New Hampshire to be even scummier, if that's possible.
But, the other, not to go back to an earlier theme, an affable scumminess. Like that is
Big
the
time.
most wonderful quality, because there is that thing about New England charm. Whereas you can be a scumbag who can turn it on for a parent. And that is what I always felt like. That's why Sandler could so seamlessly go back and forth into sort of being the really the filthy stand-up album, but he could also do the movie that your parents would watch because they wanted him to get the girl in The Wedding Singer just as much as you did.
Yes.
That's such a good point about just having to turn it on in an instant for a parent. Every kid in New England has been at like somebody's party that went off the rails, and somehow you're the one sober kid who has to say like, "Hi, Mrs. Perkins." Yeah, we didn't know any of this was going to happen.
Well, it is the classic, which Sandberg made hay out of, the Mark Wahlberg "Say Hi to Your Mother for Me." I mean,
yes.
that is because that was again from, I think, a line from one of those movies that was not one of Mark Wahlberg's biggest hits. But I love that Sandberg saw it, and no, that is the one. That is the one piece of gold.
Yes, he mined it. Well, let's skip ahead because we're talking about it now. I remember seeing on the late night show, you guys did a little film preview piece called Boston Accent.
Yeah.
That was hilarious, as we say. And I had this thing, I remember when I first saw it, which must have been right when it came out, I saw it online or something. And I had this thought watching it, I'm like, oh my God, he's doing every Boston accent. Why? And then it occurred to me, no one else can really do it, which you address in the video itself. And so are you as fascinated, I think the answer is yes, by the microclimates of Boston / New England accents?
It is so wonderful. And again, the well-made Boston movie,
Yes.
the Gone Girls or the Spotlight even, where you get 5 or 6 of them and you can tell the people who are making the film take it seriously. It's just the best. Friends of Eddie Coyle. That's that's one of the all-time greats.
But Mitchum doesn't do anything in that. He's just
Mitchum. There's an expectation that, thank God for his legacy that Robert Mitchum didn't show up late in life having to do a Boston accent.
I know, it's so hard. Why is it so hard for everyone? Like, even in a great movie like The Departed, which is an excellent movie, you have a couple of clunkers in there. Yeah. Poor Martin Sheen was in over his head.
Yep. And it seemed like took the wrong exit for what kind of Boston accent. Again, because we talk about how they're different ones, and he just went a little too patrician, and it was just too much Harvard professor, not enough law enforcement. It's a terrible mistake that you can make.
Especially, because law enforcement in Massachusetts, they have one voice. So you got to nail that. You have to nail that. But have you also noticed in Boston, because I think people think of, as you again touched on in that Boston accent trailer, the park the car in Harvard Yard, which is for sure a thing, but it's kind of the only thing some people know. And in fact, there's a Boston thing where people like to drop R's, but there's a Boston thing where they add R's where they should not be, where they say, like, Jerry Remy was the king of that. He'd say, like, the Jimmy Fund is supporting charities over the area. Like, where does that, like, he puts an R on it at the end. And
you gotta use all the R's you drop. It's a recycling
right. They're coming from a common pool. Is it the funniest accent in the world?
I do think it's the funniest. My dad's from Pittsburgh, and I think Pittsburgh, which I think from a wide shot, people mistake for Philly as well, but there is something about Pittsburgh, but it's less funny. It's more unique, and you kind of can't believe it exists still. It seems from a bygone era. So I do enjoy a good Pittsburgh accent, but I think also just people from Boston, I think one of the reasons the accent gets so much credit for being funny is that people from Boston are funnier. So there's just a higher percentage of funny things have been said over the years with a New England accent.
I'm liking everything you're saying here. Now, let's talk a little bit about SNL. What was it like? Because there was a period of time where, especially with Tina and Amy, when they sort of exploded on the scene, and there was a big election cycle, and it was like Beatles concerts, like the Weekend Update, and you yourself have been in that seat when it's going crazy. What is that like when people are so into what you're doing week to week? Is it added pressure or is it totally fun?
It's so exciting. I mean, it is a little bit like being on a winning streak where you're constantly worried about when it's going to end.
Right.
For sure, the hottest run I ever had at the show, and by me, I mean everybody there, was that Sarah Palin period of time.
Yes.
And it was so just emotionally, it happened at such a nice place because it was, right off the heels of the writer's strike. We'd all kind of been away from each other. And then we came back, we finished half a season. And then the next season was, the Sarah Palin arrival. People forget that Tina wasn't on the show anymore. She was doing 30 Rock, so she would just come back to do Palin. But
that's right.
That was already, for my money, top 3. And when I say top 3 casts, I'm not talking about myself. I consider myself very much the guy who played himself only. But top 3 casts of all time, and then you added Tina back into it. And it was a small cast, and it was a really tight cast. And we had the added attention of everybody was tuning in to see what the Sarah Palin stuff was. But it's really great when you have that, because that sort of then floated all this other really cool stuff that was happening at the same time. People who never watched the show would tune in to see what Tina would do. And then right after the cold open, there would be a MacGruber sketch. And so it was really fun. And that is the great thing about the show. When everybody's paying attention for the politics, that's a really cool time where everybody sees the thing they wouldn't have seen otherwise. They wouldn't have tuned in for.
Do you feel like maybe now something like that is harder, given like you caught the last moment of pre-YouTube, pre-internet? There's 30 impressionists now doing a Sarah Palin thing, and you can't be the first to it, so you can't be definitive. And so now you're leaving the viewer to sift through all this and choose you and then get bumped up. Like, do you think that type of breakthrough moment for network TV can still happen, or do you think it's going to come from somewhere else?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of things broke our way, because even if it was in the YouTube era, everybody thought Tina should play Sarah Palin. Yes. It was this weird thing that never happens like that. Right. So incredible good fortune fell upon the show. I think we executed really well with the opportunity. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, I think a lot of work went into it, but it would be a mistake to not also think we were lucky. I was gone by 2016, but I think a lot of people were watching that same way. It was a little less unique, I agree, because, more people were out there doing it. But I think that, certainly ratings-wise, if memory serves, that was still a pretty huge time for the show. So, but, I'm just lucky to have been there for that, because I was I played John Kerry in 2004, and I can tell you, you don't always feel the heat.
Oh, it's so hard to imagine. Kerry was such a scintillating character.
I can tell you, in 2008, Tina Fey couldn't walk down the street. In 2004, I had no trouble. I could go about my day-to-day without even being bothered.
What's so funny about, it's not funny, it's sort of sad in retrospect that the thing that they got, quote, Kerry on was that he was a flip-flopper, right?
Oh, my God.
And so what did he flip-flop about? Vietnam. First he went and was a brave soldier, and then afterwards he decided maybe Vietnam wasn't so great, and that's what cost him the election.
Yeah.
It was a sad indicator of the way our country was going.
And then he also had the misfortune of being filmed once on a windsurfer turning.
Yeah.
And they just look at him. He turned, and it's like, well, no one takes a windsurfer across the ocean and doesn't come back, you fucking idiots. You have to turn.
You saying that reminds me, it feels as though to be labeled a flip-flopper, you have to make 2 motions, because it seemed like all he did on Vietnam was flip. Like the initial, the first action is not a flip. It is just you take a position and then you could call him a flipper, but flip-flop seemed...
Yeah, they really dragged him with the extra syllable in that.
It just turns out all it ever matters is how much they like you.
Yeah.
It's true. Just none of it matters.
Well, he tried to turn things around by going on the Tonight Show. I still remember this is because we were working in late night, and I just thought this was awful. And they were like, we'll put you on a Harley, and you're going to pull up to the gate and drive right through the gate like a badass. And it just was like... fuck. It just didn't work.
We've reached the point. I wonder what you guys think about this, because obviously when this show started, I thought we'd have politicians on all the time.
Yeah.
Basically, my takeaway, and this is a nonpartisan criticism, they're mostly boring as shit. Yes. Because they don't want to risk anything, which I totally understand, right? I'm not saying it's the wrong call, but what is good for us isn't necessarily good for them. And I also feel like, especially if it's someone running in a Senate election not in New York, I wonder, is this just helping or hurting? Like, if you're here, maybe on a fundraising level it helps, which I bet most politicians would tell you is, a massive positive. But that thing, because I would never, that Harley thing, I would be so worried about any politician putting them in a situation where the photo they never lived down happened when they were on your show.
Well, do you feel like part of the difficulty with that is that appearance, in a sense, is a form of endorsement, whether explicit or not, and that you have these people on, like, now there are so many people with so many repulsive views to at least me personally, I'm not speaking for you, but that I would just go, even if that person is like a fun Republican who I disagree with, I'd just kind of go like, if I were you, I'd go, I don't want to do this. No.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because in 2016, we had everybody. Like I think most of the Republicans, and there were fewer, obviously, Democrats then. But I agree. It just, at the time, it felt like in 2016, and it's a before time now, right?
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham didn't seem like the craziest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Ted Cruz didn't seem like the craziest thing in the world. And now, after everything, the way they've debased themselves, it just doesn't seem like you could have sort of a carefree conversation that wouldn't make you feel a little gross after the fact. And the real good news is I don't feel like it costs our show anything. At the end of the day,
No.
I think people would much rather hear our take on politics than hear a politician's take on themselves. The other thing is, it was a really funny, certainly in 2020, when there was this giant field of Democratic candidates. At one point, remember, they were like breaking up the debates because there were 24 people.
Yeah.
And what happened with our audience is, you would say, our next guest is a Democratic candidate for the presidential nomination, and you could feel the audience get excited because they were internally thinking, oh my God, I might be seeing the next president. And then within 3 minutes of the interview, you could feel them all sink back in their seats as they were like, this person's not going to be president of the United States. And so it just in general wasn't very good television.
Right.
Well, you're right about that. And it also seems like Goldy and I have both come from the late night world. We worked for Kilborn for years, and a guest like that creates more work internally. It's like, well, we can't talk about anything, so we're going to play Velcro tennis tic-tac-toe with, and it's like, why do we have to come up with another tedious bit?
Yeah, because I have a lot of fun doing the show, and the people who make it, I think we all have a fun time. It's not fun trying to make a not fun person look fun.
Yeah,
I don't think that's why any of us got into comedy.
Right.
And so, I wish them all the best of luck. I think they should try harder to be fun in their everyday lives, and not just when they're
They'll enjoy
absolutely. Well, we're speaking of before times here. I'd love to talk for a minute about your White House Correspondents' Dinner, because this was, first of all, I watched it before, and I watched it again last night, and it was really funny. And it's also funny you get the sense that you're a boxer in like a 12-round fight, because it's never given from one moment to the next what the audience is going to be giving back to you.
Yes.
So was that like a unique experience for you? Have you ever experienced something like that before or since?
No. I think I've done monologues at things since, Emmys, Golden Globes. Way shorter, though. This felt...
Yes. This was 20 plus minutes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's really long.
Yeah.
And certainly the kind of performer I was then and am now, it's always about the quality of the material. I think I'm really good at delivering a joke, but it's never going to be, I find a bit where I'm, it was very station to station in that there is this joke and then there's this joke. And so the bottom could fall out at any given time, and did. I mean, there are still, I would have a very hard time going back and watching, because I still remember those moments where there were 5 or 6 just total clunkers. And the worst part about the clunkers is most of them were the ones I fought for, because I was just so in love with the writing. Now, to my credit, I put 2 jokes on a card. So I think it's 100 cards that I still have.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
And as I was going, I was self-editing. There were things where I would realize, because there's no way to know a room like that until you're in the middle of it doing it. And so there was nothing I cut on the fly that I regretted cutting.
Wow.
And I think that is there is a good lesson to be learned for writers, which is most of your regrets are the things you left in
Right.
like, over the course of your career. And but I will say it was very out of body. I had a sense it was going well.
It went very well.
I sweat through my tuxedo. It was the only time in my life. I've worn tuxedos and told jokes in them, and it was the dampest I ever was. I had when it was over, it sort of, the other crazy thing is you follow Obama, who crushed.
Yes.
And
Of course.
that's very unfair to have to follow the funniest president we've ever had.
And he's so goddamn relaxed.
Right. That's the other thing. The whole time he's doing it, he's just killing. And I know, look, I'll say something here. I do to this day think my jokes are better than his, but my delivery wasn't. You know what I mean? At one point, I was like, God, if he had my material,
Right.
I'd fucking burn this place to the ground.
Right. Cut to you two being shocked together and switching bodies.
What do you think that is? Because I relate to you when I used to do stand-up, and, I got as far as sort of I felt I could go. Like I was on Jimmy Kimmel and I did a set, but I always felt I had no money in the bank with the audience. It's just like, do you like this joke? Great. You said station to station. That's a perfect description of it. Where then there were these other comics who get on, like a Sebastian or something. It's just like, oh, you embarrassed? And everyone's like, ah. And it's like, what do you think we lack that they have? Like, why can't we just analyze it, find it, and do that?
Well, there is this thing, because I do think it's such a skill, right?
Yes.
That I think I could write a great Sebastian bit, but that's a credit to Sebastian and the fact that he built this vessel that people are excited to see. So I could write it, but I couldn't do it. Nobody would want me to do it. And even today, like I still do stand up and I have to be backstage telling myself, these people like you. They wouldn't have bought these tickets otherwise. But at the same time, I think they just watch me in a different way and I don't blame them for it, which is they're not gonna, oh, I love when he does that voice. And he just does 50
Can I run a
minutes of that
theory
voice.
by, like, I think it might be this, but I don't know. But I often wonder if it's because as a writer, like you see the full diversity of options and you go, I don't want to pick one and go like, I'm an Italian guy now forever who's just locking
Right,
in.
yes.
And you go like, because I could literally write, I feel, you've written for many people.
Right.
And you've written successfully for yourself and other people that you go, I don't want to lock into this one thing because I can think of more. But then you present that to an audience and they're just like, I don't know what this is.
Right. Well, even when because when I do stand up now, a lot of it's about having kids, right?
Yeah.
A lot of it's about being married. And I think that certainly using the eye test, that demographic is a lot of the people who are there. Then if I go anywhere a little bit darker, which I feel like is very well written, and it's not like dark for darkness sake, but I can feel that they're like, whoa, we just heard about your kids. And I want to be like, yeah, but I'm a lot of different things. We contain multitudes. And you can tell an audience sometimes doesn't want to make those tone shifts in real time with you.
Yeah, and it's funny, Goldy, you bring up like, because I totally get the station to station stuff, and you say like, well, look at Seth. He has such Seth, you have like an all-time likable face. Like
Very
you
nice
could have
face.
been a
Very
presenter
nice face.
in like the 1930s or something, and people would have been like, I like this young man. And so that gives like, we never had that, Goldy, going on stage.
Oh,
it was
you're
the
nice.
opposite
I can
of that.
feel like a weighted blanket, the palpable instant dislike of people. And I still do the second I enter a room where it's like, it's not even indifference. It's just like, oh, don't make me look at him for 5 minutes. And
So,
I just,
Seth, you have the jump on us there.
Yeah.
But I
it's the
just
Brody
want to.
Stevens genius line. I hate you first.
Yeah, Brody Stevens used to come
That's
out on
our
stage and
approach.
say, I hate you first. But Seth, just to talk for a minute more about this White House Correspondents' Dinner, because
Please.
obviously in the middle, there is this now fantastic moment where you absolutely slam like 4 torpedoes into Trump's side. And it was one of those things where, because Goldy and I have talked on this podcast before, and I'm sure you've had this thought many times, before Trump was like the worst person in the world, he was just kind of this somewhat likable bozo from a reality show. Like he seemed like a blowhard, but it was like he kind of made you laugh with the you're fired. And then there was this moment where when you're delivering these absolutely savage and awesome jokes about him, where you said, I heard he was running as a Republican, I thought he was running as a joke, which was a first great joke. And they show shots of him just sitting there, like one head that's not moving in a sea of people who are rocking back and forth laughing. And did you have the thought, like, this is like a Batman villain origin story?
Since I have, certainly.
Yeah,
but
of
at
course
the time,
not then.
Yeah, a couple things is I remember we had written a lot about birth certificate stuff. We had a lot of birth certificate jokes. And I believe 2 days ahead of it, Obama released his long form birth certificate.
You made funny jokes about that, too.
And we were like, oh. But then I think Trump was a late invite. The Washington Post invited him, and we couldn't believe our luck because all of a sudden, the actual, when they give you a list of who's in the room, it's not like the Oscars. It's not a bunch of people that everybody knows. And so all of a sudden we had someone there. My favorite thing about that shot, to bring it back to New Hampshire, it looked like the old man in the mountain on the back of the quarter. Because it was weird. Like, there's no good shots on C-SPAN. It's the only good shot in the history of the White House Correspondents' Dinner. They got this. They got a clean shot of a stoic guy at a table.
Yes.
And when it was over, I had called in the run-up to it. I had called Al Franken because he'd done it a couple times in the late 90s, and I just wanted to pick his brain about the Correspondents' Dinner. And when I walked off, while I was walking off, my phone rang, and it was Franken. Yeah. And I remember he said, "It was great. If you see Donald Trump, go the other way." I had no sense on stage how it had played with him. God. But certainly since then, I mean, credit to Donald Trump, who for real had the last laugh on that night, because every single Washington elite was walking around that night, making their way over to me, being like, "Well, I think that's the end of that." And so I do want to tip my cap to the heightening that our former President Trump did on that night, because he certainly made me, every one of those jokes, they were delicious jokes to eat, but he made me eat every last one of them.
God. Well, it's worth it now in retrospect just to watch the comedy again and see it really land, because that's another thing. You get a sense that nothing really landed on him. You could never land a clean blow. Goldy, I think you said that when we were talking about Trump. You just could only get a glance. These were clean blows.
I'm now picturing in my mind 20 years from now, when they make the definitive Trump film, who's going to play you doing those jokes. Like, will they go with a serious actor who's like, I want to be a comic in this one, or do you think they'll go with a premier comic at the time?
Well, my 6-year-old did say to me the other day, "When you die, do you think I'll host your show?" So maybe he's getting a little ahead of himself.
He's got a good entertainment mind.
I saw Trump. That was on a Saturday night. I saw Trump on the following Monday at the Met Ball in New York City. And Lorne had said something to me a long time ago, which was never tell a joke about somebody where you wouldn't go up to them the next time you saw them. And I did feel every one of those jokes was very fair. Okay. And he was being a total shitheel about Obama and deserved everything he got that night. So I walked over to him and I shook his hand. I said, "Thanks for being a good sport the other night," which he hadn't been. But I wanted to give him the ability.
Yeah, give him an opportunity.
He said, "You went too far. You were very mean. Obama was funny, but you went too far. You went too far."
Oh my God, that's awesome.
I said, "I respectfully disagree, but enjoy the rest of your evening." And he would, every now and then, usually around the anniversary of that, he would tweet something about me having no talent.
What a compliment.
And then at the SNL 40th, 2014, we were, and it's a tiny studio. I think people are always underwhelmed by how few people can fit into that thing. Mm-hmm. And it was just like famous people walking down the same aisle trying to find their seats. And you've never seen more crazy famous people saying, like, "Excuse me." And he was coming towards me, and I was with my wife, and he was with Melania, and we were passing each other. And so we were just like face to face. And he took my hand and he pulled me in and he goes, "You do have talent. Don't tell anyone I ever said it." And we laughed, and I thought, well, this is a nice end of it. And then he ran for president. So I really thought, I was like, oh, that's let me just say something. Also, which is crazy with everything we know, but I'm just going to be honest. He is charismatic, right? When he when he shines his light on you, which you can't believe. But he's like, you do have talent. I was like, you know what? You're all right, Mr. Trump. Forgot about everything. Forgot about the
Melted
fucking
away.
birtherism and, so.
He thinks I'm funny.
So that would have been the great ending to that story.
That was the
unfortunately.
great ending.
He had
it
to
spun out.
take
I
it
mean,
over
that
for-
might be in the movie. We might.
Yeah.
that confrontation. Or
Do
just
you
that-
think? Because I would be so chicken shit in that situation. Like, I would never be on the same side of the room with him again, and then I would make more fun of him, and then I would hide the rest of my life. Like, just hearing your dad was an investment banker, did that give you any sort of like perspective on the world in terms of like deal making, and you might not agree, but you just come together? Like, where does that come from for you?
I don't know. I would say that my dad, if anything, my dad, and again, we're very, very close, but he had a temper, and I was a pretty slack student, and my dad always thought that I was sort of wasting my potential. And so there were a lot of times in my upbringing where my dad was really screaming at me. Yeah. And I think it was healthy in that later in my life, I would take it from anybody as long as it wasn't my dad. I was like, you don't scare me.
Right, totally.
I've gotten a face full of shit from Larry Meyers for half an hour. You're nothing. You're nothing.
So now I just want to, we're going to only keep you for a few more minutes here, but Late Night with Seth is awesome. It's so fun. And you are, as I mentioned up top, it's like you're carrying on in the tradition of the coolest slot in Late Night. When you think about who's been in your chair, it's just a succession of people that everybody loves, and everybody kind of loves their comedy.
It's nuts.
And so do you ever sit back and feel the weight of that, or do you just kind of say, like, I'm doing my own thing and I enjoy what I'm doing?
I think I felt the weight of it certainly when it began. One thing that worked in my favor is I was taking over for Jimmy, and he wasn't gone. He was just earlier. So I think that the people who loved him didn't resent that we were doing something different because they still had him. And that's a nice way to go into it. And sort of, was briefly the case for Jimmy and Conan, and was never the case for Conan and Dave. So that was lucky. And I tried not to get too caught up in the history and the weight of that. I will say that our show during the pandemic, where we started doing it without an audience and basically had 18 months where we were sort of invited by circumstances to make the exact show we wanted to make because there was no audience judging it in real time, was the first time that I thought, oh, this is what I wish we'd done from the beginning, but I think if we had done it from the beginning, people would have hated it. Like, you kind of had to earn it. And, if I'd have said, 5 years into the show to NBC, I think what we got to do is we got to take this show to an attic for 3 months. If I'd have said that independent of a pandemic, they would have been like, what are you talking about? But that was, I kind of, and again, I liked our show a great deal before the pandemic, but this show post the pandemic, we feel really close to the audience, feel like we're getting away with things that we wouldn't have had the nerve to try ahead of it. And Letterman has been on the show twice, and the first time was before the pandemic, the second time was after. And the second time he came, I was prouder of what we were, in a way that I wanted him, the fact that he was there to see it, I felt really good about. Yeah. And not that I think that he spends any time worrying about, I don't think he's the kind of person who's like, protect my show, but it was cool for me to have him there and be proud of what we were putting out.
Yes.
Well, one thing I just love about your show and your demeanor is that when I was an intern at Conan and Letterman came on, we were told, like, don't look at Dave. And then it was like, Conan, he's hilarious and he was very nice. He had so much agita about it, but you seem to really enjoy it. Like, and I don't know if that's an act or not, but you seem to appreciate what you're doing and like it, and the people you work with, the bringing of the writers on and the sharing of it. And is that something that, like, because you were a writer, you knew to do, or is that just your natural disposition, or did you come to that later?
That's the Midwest.
But I do consider myself a writer first, and I do love being around writers. And we've had an interesting journey with the writers on our show, because when we started the show, we had this sense of, we'll use the writers like I used to use the SNL cast at Weekend Update, which was a miscalculation because not every update feature works. And they have the advantage of it's Bill Hader or Kate McKinnon or Andy Samberg or people the audience know and are rooting for. When I brought out my writers very early on in the show, it was not working at all. I think people were very turned off by it. And so the show had to work behind the strength of whatever I was saying first. And then we had the permission to sort of bring our writers back in. And so it is funny how I think every writer who works on a comedy show wish they wrote for Conan in the 90s.
We say this all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I thought you said wants to be on camera. Oh, no.
Oh, well, they definitely, they all want to be on camera.
Yeah,
but I think that certainly the generation of writers I have, they came up on Conan in the 90s, and they forget that a lot of other steps took place before that favorite quirky thing they saw.
Right.
And so
Totally.
that was the process you have to figure out, which is you kind of have to keep putting on these layers, these coats of paint that the audience agree to, and then you can try something else, and then you can try something else, and then you can build to a place where you're doing exactly what you want. But if you start that way, I think the audience would blame you for not taking it seriously.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we mentioned briefly before we started here your production partner, Mike Shoemaker, who is a really great guy, and you've worked with him for a while now. He actually fired me from SNL, but he did it very nicely.
I want for our listener, he did say hello to Alex for me.
Yes, no, he's a great guy. But you guys have formed a production company with a name that I love. Will you hit us with that name?
Seth Myers.
Love it. Love it. See, and tell us, you said it got kind of a reaction from some
Yeah,
friends
we
of
told
yours.
Tina Fey and Robert Carlock, we have dinner with them once or twice a year, and they rolled their eyes back in their head. Because I will say, so Mike Shoemaker is the best. I mean, obviously, for you, Alec, this did not turn out to be the case. I would say he's the best friend a writer could have. For real. And although, the very fact that he did it nicely, I think that speaks well, right?
No, and I was just a little punk writer's assistant, and I was totally expendable, and I thought I was entitled to a lot more than I was entitled to at the time. And he fired me not because he gave a shit about what I was doing, really one way or the other. He was just told to.
Yeah.
But he's always been incredibly nice to me. But what kind of stuff? What kind of stuff are you guys working on together? Like what does your
we have
production
our one goal with our production company
Yeah.
is to help facilitate people, writers we like, getting shows made. We're
that's
not
cool.
really out trying to find writers we don't know. We did this show AP Bio with Mike O'Brien, who's this really funny writer at SNL that we were friends with, and so that was a great thing where we could jump in and help get that made. We do Amber Ruffin's show on Peacock. She's developing new stuff. This writer, Jeff Wright, with us is developing new stuff. So we're always just trying to help we're not trying to build an empire as much as, we have this great stable of writers on our show, and when they want to do other things, we are just trying to make that an easier road for them.
That's so cool.
That's nice. So you guys are not looking to do like movies or pick up stuff like that. It's exclusively kind of a TV.
I mean, the thing is, every now and then, writers on our show write movie scripts. One of our writers, Seth Reese, just co-wrote The Menu with writer Will Tracy, who works at Succession now. But we don't know how to produce movies. And so we're very honest. When our writers come to us, we sort of say, I would take it, if you want us to be the production company for your movie, we'll certainly be happy to do it. But we also encourage you to go somewhere where people know how to get movies made. Because the one thing we don't want to do as producers is oversell what we can make happen.
Yeah.
That's
That's
smart and uncommon attitude today. Wish more production companies would admit the things that they cannot do. Anyway, please say a nice hello back to Mike. And finally, just because we are ostensibly a writing podcast, you've had the opportunity now to hire writers at SNL, at your show. Is there anything a quality that you look for in a writer or their submission when you're looking at stuff, or is it just like make me laugh?
I mean, making you laugh is important, and certainly at SNL, the thing Shoemaker would always say is, you're going to read these packets, you're going to see so many things that you've already seen on the show, but if you see one flourish that is unique, one thing you've never seen before, just put a pin in that. You're not looking for a 3-sketch submission where 2 of them are good enough to be on the show. You're just looking for something unique. And that's the way we are at late night too. You want to hire somebody who look, it helps if you can tell they've seen your show. With that said, you don't want something you already have. The least happy writers' rooms are when there's 7 staffers who are good at the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're always just trying to find a point of view or a style or a thing that doesn't exist at late night yet. And that would, I would just say, because it was funnier earlier when I was saying everybody talks like Adam Sandler, and you said the same thing happens with pilots. Of course, being in show business, I thought you meant comedy pilots. And I was like, yeah, no, they're all the same. Like, I think there's that.
True.
And so I think, and certainly I remember when I came out of college, like we had I was in this creative writing for the media, and it was like they were teaching you to write the pilot, write the sample that everybody's already written, just to show that like you're good at like margins and things like that. And again, I don't know how it is other places, and I'm sure there is still a sort of hiring style in LA that celebrates the same. But we're always, I would just encourage people like write that thing that only you could write. And
that's such great advice. And it's like you said earlier with that nugget that Sandberg took out of the Mark Wahlberg, say hello to your mother for me. Like if there's a turn of phrase like that in some writing, like that's worth its weight in gold, always. Well, Seth Myers, you've been so nice to come and talk with us today.
Thank you so much.
Our fans don't need this direction, but of course you can always see Seth on his late night show on
Thank you. That is very important to me.
NBC. Yeah.
I'm always about promotion.
And you may pick up about 12 fans. Based
You're about to get crushed in a tsunami of publicity. I want you to be prepared.
I might give Nielsen a heads up now to keep an eye on the data.
Switchboard operator spinning in their chair. All right, Seth, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.